The seminary is located on the grounds of the monastery of Saint Blaise or Shenblash. So this saint was martyred. There was at this location because there was a stone there from his martyrdom. There's some confusion and questions about who he was, because there's a Saint Blaise of Sebast normally associated with Eastern Turkey. There's a question about how that person is, what the connection is, if there's a connection between him and the saint who was martyred in Albania. But this saint was apparently a bishop of a city. Actually, there's a small city of Sebast in Albania, and then up above that city was a cave where he lived as a monk, and then he was brought to Durrës, because that was the capital in Roman times, so in the 4th century, and martyred apparently at our location on the hill behind Durrës. But his relics were then buried nearby, and then kept at a monastery, which later was taken over by the Roman Catholics, and then brought to Dubrovnik in Croatia. Another famous saint in Albania is Saint John Vladimir, who was a Serbian prince or ruler within the Western Bulgarian Empire of, let's see, what's his name? I'll think of it, but he was based in Ohrid, Samuel, of Tsar Samuel of Ohrid. So he was son-in-law to Tsar Samuel, and he ruled over northern Albania and southern Montenegro. But when Tsar Samuel died, there was his son was killed by a usurper, a relative, and in order to prevent a civil war, St. John Vladimir agreed to a peace conference in Ohrid, which he went to, but then when he was killed there by the usurper. He went into the church by the gate of Ohrid, and then when he came out, he was executed by the usurper's troops. So he's probably kind of in the category of these martyrs of non-resistance to evil, sort of like King Wenceslaus in Bohemia and Boris and Gleb in Russia. And this was about the same time. Well, in John Vladimir's case, it would have been 11th century when he was martyred. There's also a famous saint for not just for Albania, but for in the Greek world, Saint Kosmas of Aetolia, who was a monk in Mount Athos, but then asked a blessing to be able to go out and to preach, because one of the problems were that because there was such a shortage of clergy and of education, people were Christians living under the Turks were often forgetting the Christian faith and becoming kind of blending into the Muslim population. Many of them are becoming Muslim, which is why the percentage of Christians dwindled so much over the centuries. So St. Kosmas traveled around preaching in the different villages and encouraging them to found schools to be able to study and maintain the ability to read the Greek language. And this helped preserve Orthodox Christianity in the Balkans. So one of the areas that he worked was in the coastal part of Albania. But eventually he was executed by the Turkish authorities, and his body was thrown into the river, and where it floated down the river and kind of landed on the side of the river. In that spot, a monastery was built, and his grave was there. So that's near the modern city of Fir, which is ancient Apollonia. Okay. So that monastery during communist times was flooded from the river and filled with mud. But after communist times, the Archbishop, this was dug out, and so a large part of that church actually is preserved, and some of the frescoes are preserved, and the monastery partly has been rebuilt, and so this is now a place of pilgrimage for the feast of St. Kosmas. His relics were recovered, and by his grave there's a fresco of St. Kosmas over the grave, and so the relics are kept actually in Tirana now, but then brought back to the monastery for his feast, and so people come from all around to go there. In the case actually of John Vladimir that I mentioned, there's his relics also are brought to them because he had founded a monastery near Elbasan, and his relics had been kept there. His body was brought there after he was killed, and so there's a annual pilgrimage to that monastery as well to venerate his relics. And actually, the relics of John Vladimir are packed in cotton, and that cotton is taken out and distributed, and new cotton is put in every year along with the bones. To think. Okay, there's a later saint, Saint Nicodemus of Berat, who was originally from Vithkuch in the south, but he had moved to Berat. So I think in the 1700s is when he lived. He was someone who, I guess, wanted to marry a Muslim woman or something, that he did be converted to Islam to be able to do what he wanted, but then later he repented and went to Mount Athos and became a monk there. And then after a while he decided that he needed to go back to Berat and to sort of renounce his conversion to Islam, and which publicly. So of course, in going to Mount Athos to be a monk, he had returned to his Christian faith, but he wanted to do that publicly since he felt that he had maybe led people into temptation by doing that. So when he came back, he publicly announced his returning to the Christian faith, and then he was executed by the Turks and was thrown off of the cliff, because the city of Berat has a hill which is like an acropolis with a fortress on top, which was the center of the city during the medieval times. So his body was thrown down, and then it was preserved in a church for a while until World War II. During World War II, I think because the Italians destroyed the church in order to widen the road, but some family preserved his relics, especially, well, I guess his head, which was like in a separate reliquary. They actually kept that secret all during the communist period, and then just a few years ago they returned this to the church, and so now after many years the head of Saint Nicodemus of Berat is again able to be venerated. So that was kind of very wonderful to be able to visit Berat, and the metropolitan there, Metropolitan Ignati, showed us, had allowed us, the students, to venerate his relics. There were other saints. So the Apostle Caesarius, first bishop of Durrës. The second bishop Asti was martyred around the same time as St. Ignatius of Antioch during the reign of Trajan. And he was crucified in the Forum, probably very close to the area where the amphitheater was built by Trajan also. And so the church, the cathedral in Durrës, is named Cathedral of St. Paul and St. Asti, after St. Paul the Apostle and St. Asti the martyr. There was in Durrës also a very famous person from the for Byzantine music, John Kukazelis, who helped to, let's say, systematize Byzantine music during the late Middle Ages. And also there are other saints connected with Albania, but of whom I know less about them. But veneration for saints, there's churches, of course. What are the popular Orthodox saints, like Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Nicholas, the Bishop of Myr, Saint Spiridon. These are, well, Saint Spiridon's relics were brought after the fall of Constantinople, were brought to Corfu, which is right off the south coast of Albania. So there, and actually I think they stopped in Durrës on the way at that point. So there's a lot of veneration to Saint Spiridon. But yeah. There's of monasteries. There's the monastery of Saint Vlach is not really functioning as a monastery. It's now where the seminary and an orphanage are located. But we do have a women's monastery outside of the old monastery grounds. There's a monastery at Ardenica, which was is also near Fear. That's a monastery up on a tall hill, and that's actually used as a monastery by the church today. So that actually was there was an attempt to destroy it during the communist times, but a bishop who was being held prisoner there, he discouraged the group that came to destroy it, and as a result, the place was preserved as a cultural monument. So, fortunately, preserving one of the most beautiful Orthodox places in the country from destruction. So this now is a functioning monastery for the church. And it's not very far from the monastery of St. Kosmas, but it's up on this tall hill that overlooks the flat farming land around Fear, whereas the monastery of St. Kosmas is down by the side of the river, down below the hill. There's also a monastery of the life-giving font, which is being used now down in southern Albania near Durmi, and an old monastery of St. Theodore, the two St. Theodores, that had been turned into a Soviet naval base during the Cold War period. But now, just recently, after a long period of waiting, was restored to the church, and so the church has made some repairs to it, and made it into a place that's able to be used for a boys' camp. So actually, the monastery of St. John Vladimir near Elbasan, that's being used as a women's camp, a girls' summer camp, and St. Theodore, monastery of St. Theodore, the boys' summer camp area. There's also a famous monastery of St. Marina in the eastern part of Albania, up in the mountains. It's very remote, but there's a pilgrimage to that monastery as well. And I think there the monastery buildings are also old buildings that are preserved.